The other strand has to do with our trade work. The Africa Trade Network, again, is a Pan-African organization of groups working on trade and development issues in Africa. Part of the TrustAfrica support went into funding the annual review and strategy meeting. The ATN meeting was very important because in all Africa's regions, the ongoing negotiations with the European Union on economic partnership agreements. Historically, the ATN had operated around global trade issues centered at the WTO. So it was easy to have a common position around a single global challenge. But the EPAs are being negotiated regionally. So there's a West Africa process, a Central Africa process, an East Africa process, a Southern African process. So there's this fragmentation. So it's become even more important that the member organizations of the ATN get together, share experience, and strategize for how they are going to work. And the Yaoundé meeting was extremely important. We always try to move the meetings of the networks around. But TWN serves as the secretariat of both of the networks that I've talked about. Because we spend a lot of resources on the networks because we recognize, as I said earlier, that we need to aggregate and amplify African voices. African philanthropy is important because African grant makers are quite close to the problem. The starting point of their concern is the localization of what might be common, the Africanization of what could be common concerns, which they may share with more global grant makers. A grant maker at the global level who says, our vision is a world without poverty. Great. But if you bring that to, say, an African grant maker who says, our vision is an Africa without poverty, it gives a particular concreteness to that and challenges the problematic in an African kind of context. Now, even as African philanthropy is never going to be able, at least in the near term, to match the quantities of money that come from large global funders, I believe that there's a qualitative contribution they can make. We can change the value of what everybody else is bringing, even if it's larger quantities, which is simply because of their proximity and the kind of relations that they develop with African organizations. What they can add might allow these groups to have a comfort zone about some issues that are important for the continent, but may not fit that readily into the global aggregation of global grant making, and hopefully help to strengthen some of the ways in which African organizations work with each other, and how they try and intervene around some of the pressing issues, of governance, broadly defined, from political governance to economic governance and those kinds of questions. And of course, building capacities. Third and finally, they can act as interlocutors, speaking with other grantors from outside the continent in a way that beneficiary organizations are not located to be engaged in those conversations. So the African grant-making organizations could use their influence to point, grantors from outside the continent in the directions of what is important, rather than simply being lost in a gray of kind of global, kind of representation